What is up, people of YouTube? I'm your host Vernon. This is Lake Mead. Let's fish that. Alright guys, I've been out here this morning trying to catch some striped bass or some regular bass. Been throwing around some top waters, some spinners, and of course I have some anchovies out here for the stripers. We were successful in catching quite a lot of small little stripers. There we are guys, tiny little striper. This is about the size of the fish that's out there at the moment. We're not having a lot bigger fish out there, only small guys like this. But that's not why we're out here today. Alright, but this is not going to be a fishing video. This is going to be more of a teaching video. So that I want to focus today specifically on using cast nets out here on Lake Mead. Alright, so there are a few key features that I want to touch on. So in the taskbar or the sliding bar below this video, I will put different markers explaining each of the different sections I want to talk about. So I want to talk about stuff like why would you want to use a cast net, the rules and regulations. Then I actually want to show you guys the method I use, the one I prefer, how to do that. And I want to do a little section of afterwards when you actually catch the fish, how do you rig that up to cast that out there to hopefully catch some bigger fish. Okay, so first up, why would you want to use a cast net? Well, the simple answer to that is free bait. Lake Mead is one of the lakes that have quite a big and diverse set of bait fish, and using a cast net is a great way to obtain these bait fish so that you don't have to pay for them. You can actually catch them yourself and use them to fish. Okay, so the guys out there on the boats, they quite regularly use cast nets to catch some shad or shiners that they use for bait. So in a place like Lake Mead or Lake Mojave, we have a few good circumstances working together to make bait fish even accessible to us bank anglers. This happens particularly in the fall. So during summer, these bait fish are up shallow, they are breeding, so there are lots of small little fish in these coves. And the common belief out there is that smallmouth bass are the instigators of this feeding frenzy type behaviors, where they come up into the shallows and they chase all these bait fish together. These bait fish try to make these schools or big balls of bait fish because there's of course safety in numbers for them. And these balls then move out into deeper waters to gather more in mass. And that is why by late summer you will hear about people on boats talking about the boils happening on Lake Mead. These big boils of bait fish are way out in the lake, and you have all these fish chasing these small little fish, and they do a boil on top of the water. But as fall approaches, the sun of course is a lot lower than it should be. The days are already shorter than they were, meaning that the water temperature is also starting to cool down. And with all of this, the predatory fish are chasing these big schools of bait fish up against natural ledges or something like this little wall we have back here, man-made walls. They chase the fish up against them to try and keep these balls compacted, as well as they're also chasing these bait balls into the shallower waters, into the little coves, to try and keep them there so they can keep nibbling on these little bait fish. And it's exactly at that point when they reach these shallower parts where it's easier for us bank anglers to use a cast net and get some free bait. Okay, so next on our list is rules and regulations. Now of course YouTube is not based just in one single country, so you can be watching this anywhere. That is why you need to check your local regulations anywhere where you are. Each country, each state, each region and each county has their own set of rules that you need to follow. So please do check your local rules and regulations on what size nets you are allowed to use and whether you are allowed to use nets. In some places, the specific pond or lake you are trying to use a net in also has some rules and regulations whether you're allowed to do so or not. For instance, here in southern Nevada, only Lake Mead, Lake Mojave and the Colorado River you are allowed to use nets. And of course check your regulations, because there might be some rules on the size of the mesh that you're allowed to use. So before just ordering a net to throw out there, make sure you have the right size and the right size mesh as well. Okay, so here at Lake Mead, we are allowed to use nets for the bait fish. This is my net that I have here. I quickly want to explain the regulations on the nets here in Lake Mead. You are only allowed to use a 4-foot net, nothing bigger than that. What I mean by 4 foot is the radius. That means from the horn, this little yellow rubber thing, this little yellow plastic thing I have here, this is the horn. So from the horn all the way down to your weights, that is the radius. That's supposed to be 4 foot. And of course, a 4-foot radius means that your diameter is going to be 8 foot. Please don't get the two confused. You're only allowed to use a 4-foot net here at Lake Mead. And then of course you have to check your regulations as well as what fish you are actually allowed to use as bait fish. Like I mentioned, here in Lake Mead we are blessed with having threadfin shad, gizzard shad, there's some shiners in here, lots of different bait fish that we're allowed to use. Any bait fish that you catch with your net you can use. Just please do be aware that if you catch some small bass or bluegill using your net and you lifeline them, please note that that little fish counts to your daily limit, meaning you're only allowed 10 bass per day. So even that small one fish, that counts as one of your 10 for the day. So you're only allowed to use 10 of them per day. So just be aware that using game fish as a bait fish, there are certain limits as well to that. There are only small amounts that you can use. Okay, but having all the basics sorted, let's move over to actually getting a net and throwing the net. Now please do note that there are many different styles of throwing a net. Some of the best net throwers out there are people with big nets that they put over their shoulders. They're some of the best net throwers out there. I only started throwing a net this last year. I've been practicing around on some different techniques, and I found one that I believe is the easiest to use, especially for us bank anglers, and I quickly want to show you guys how that looks. Okay guys, so I have my net here with me. The first step is going to be securing this to your arm. Now there's some debate on this, whether it's better to do a good secure loop around your arm. The problem with this is, should you catch a big 60-pound catfish or something, there's a possibility of that fish actually pulling you into the water. Likewise, if you're on a boat, if the rope gets stuck around your trolling motor or your main motor, that might actually pull you into the water. So if you're going to make a secure knot around your arm, please do have a little knife with you so you can actually cut the rope if need be. I prefer, however, to have a loose setup on my arm. So I'm putting my arm through the loop, just twisting it around once again, and that's now secured to my arm. Now of course it's not necessarily needed to roll up the entire rope. You can just dangle that on the ground, but being on the bank, you're going to have some rocks and some trees around. You're always going to have something to get snagged on, so it is better to make a small loop with the rope into your hand. Now of course I am right-handed. This works a bit different if you're left-handed, just keep that in mind. Alright, so now the important part, we have rolled up rope in our hand and we have our net. Now step one is going to be to put the net down in front of you. Try putting half of it on one side, the other half on the other side of your body, so you have the two separate sides. Using this time to check whether there's any sticks or rocks or anything in your net, or whether it's all clear. From there on, you're going to grab your net, and you want to do so 1/3 of the way down, and you grab it with the hand holding the rope, but you're facing your palm away from you, so showing towards the net. You grab 1/3 down, you just grab onto that. Alright, so having your net like this now, you're going to grab on the left side, grab the weights on the left side and put them over your hand, into your hand, making sure that they are hanging off to the side, as the same side as where you have the other weights. And while hanging onto this, you want to grab the top part of the weights where you have this little netting going on, and just hook the top part of that onto your thumb. So just hook it over your thumb, supporting the net. So the net's in my hands, that little one is over my thumb, that's your little trigger finger. That's just to make sure that the net stays open when you are doing your throw. And now with your other hand, you grab the remainder of the weights and see how I'm already kind of pulling the net open. This means that when I do throw the net, it's already kind of open, and when you're throwing the net, you're throwing with your right arm, and your left hand is going to hang onto the net for just a second more than you are with the other hand, so you get a spinning motion opening the entire net. As is at the moment, I have my net locked and loaded. I can move around and try to see where I can find some fish, and just grab it open and do the throw once I get to the desired location. This is why it's so important to have the little rope collected in your hand, because then you can move around freely, no problems with getting stuck on something. Okay, so the next step is going to be to throw the net, and something important I want to mention when throwing the net, do you put your left foot forward, do you put your right foot forward, does it even matter? Yes, it actually does. The way it works is the direction that your hips are pointing in, or your pelvis is pointing, that is the direction you are going to throw. Meaning if I put my left foot forward, I'm going to throw to this side. My hips are pointing this way, so I'm going to throw this way. Should I swap my legs around, my hips are pointing the other way, so if I throw, I'm going to throw that way. So do keep that in mind. The foot you're standing on when throwing does actually matter. Alright, so let's quickly throw the net. I'm going to throw it on the ground, that way I know I don't pick up any rocks or any sticks from the water, just to show you guys the motion of throwing it. Again, I just grab my little side like that. Net is already halfway open, and now we can just throw it. Now I've seen a lot of crazy things where people do whirling, spinning motions. If that works for you, do that. I, however, am not that limber. I just have the throwing action in my hips. Alright, so we have our net. Take it back to the side. Now, very important when throwing your net, you want your focus point to be on the water's edge, meaning you're aiming for a certain spot on the water, that's where you're throwing to. Don't think of throwing too high. Never look up in the air when throwing your net, look at the specific spot you're throwing to. If you throw it up in the air, your net's going to open up and close and just fall into the water, whereas if you throw to that spot, it will reach the apex of being open on that exact spot. Alright guys, so I'm going to be trying to get some footage of this throwing action into the water. We have lots of grass, lots of twigs around. You don't want your net to sink all the way down to the bottom, because you will get snagged on these little sticks. Secondly, the fish aren't necessarily on the bottom. You need to figure out where in the water column the fish are, because as the net is sinking, it leaves time for the fish to swim out underneath. So you have to close the net by pulling on the rope. That actually closes the net. And the fish will be trapped in the net on these loose ends. They'll be trapped in there. To get the fish out, you just lift the horn, and that will release your fish. Shaking them will fall. If you shake it, they will fall out into a bucket you collect them in, or something like that. And the reason why I say this is a great method to use for us bank anglers, you might be seeing a boil happening somewhere, you see the bait fish there. This is actually quite easy to do once you get the hang of it. And you're ready to go and throw and catch some bait. Okay, so I had to go into the water, so I had to take off the electronics, but I did manage to catch some gizzard shad, and that's what our little gizzard shad looks like. This is one of the main bait fish here from Lake Mead, so let's quickly use one of these guys and cast him out there to see if we can get something. Alright guys, let's quickly talk about what to use when you want to use these bait fish. Now you can use about any setup that you want to, whether it be a high-low rig, a Carolina rig, anything like that will work, and of course any size hook will work as well. This is the normal Eagle Claw #1 hook that I normally use when catching striped bass. This is what I use when I put on a anchovy. I will put that on the big hook, but for catching fish this time of year, this big hook is too big. We're having lots of small fish out there, so might struggle with something like that. So the setup that I am going to be using is something like this. It's a little pre-made Carolina rig, just to make it easier to apply onto my rod and cast out there. I have a little barrel weight with some beads on there between two swivels, and then on my leader I have a wide hook like that. Now why a wide hook? It just helps to hook the fish a bit better. The hooks that I'm using at the moment, I'm using the Owner mosquito hooks. The reason why I would recommend these, they are not sponsored or anything, the reason why I recommend them, these hooks are made specifically for live lining, whether it be minnows, craws, leeches, anything like that. These hooks are made for that. They are thin wired hooks, but extremely strong thin wired hooks, so you can catch big fish on them, but being a small thin hook, it's easier to get through the little bait fish. Alright guys, there are several different ways to rig a bait fish. One being through the tail. That has a weird swimming action in the water, but there's less of a risk of killing the fish if you hook it through the tail. The other being just below the dorsal fin. You hook it through there, just below the fin. This has a very good swimming action, especially when using a float on the top. That keeps the fish upright. But my preferred way is rigging them through the head. Going through the back, you stand the chance of actually killing the fish, whereas going through the head, you have less of a chance of killing the fish if you do it right. You want to be going through the jaw and through the nose, hooking it like that. Why through the jaw? The fish is not going to rip out its own jaw. This means the fish is always pointing towards your hook. Alright, so having it hooked through its mouth and nostrils still gives the fish a chance to swim around. It also gets oxygen through its gills, so it will stay alive a lot longer. And predatory fish wants to swallow fish head first so that the scales and fins don't damage them. So they tend to go for the head first, so having the hook in the head is a better way of making sure you actually hook the predatory fish. Now let's quickly get this guy out there to see if we can find some bigger stripers or something. Lots of baby little stripers out here. Seen some big ones boiling around, but small ones get the bait long before the big ones have the chance. Alright, I had a pretty good time out here. I got a total of 37 of those small little stripers, and all on the light setup. Using small hooks and small pieces of bait, you can catch quite a lot of them. Had two pretty good takes on the lifelining the baits out there, but unfortunately I wasn't able to land anything on that. Having had the two good takes on that, I think if I take a little bit more time and do that again, I might have some success with that. So the idea today was just to show you guys my idea on how to use nets, and that nets are a good way to get some baits. Now you can save quite a lot of money if you don't have to buy baits, if you can catch them from the lake yourself. Yes, nets are expensive, but it's a once-off purchase for something that can save you quite a lot in the end. Alright, but that's going to bring an end to this teaching session. If you guys enjoyed the video or you found anything quite informative, please do give me a little thumbs up. Feel free to share with anyone that you think needs to learn about nets. Feel free to ask any questions down below in the comments, or if you just want to give a shout out to someone, please do write it in the comments down there. If this is the first video of mine you're seeing, please do hit the subscribe button, join my community, and feel free to have a look around on my channel what other videos I have out there. Alright, but nothing more to do then. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.